I was abused by my biological father, so that was a lot of trauma. I was around 8, 9 years old, and I didn't tell a soul. I didn't tell a soul till well into my 30s. Actually, my mother would always say, if things get uncomfortable, just don't think about it and it'll go away. That was literally her mantra. Like, just don't think about it and it'll go away. So I tried to not think about it, and I was hoping it would go away. And for a little bit, it kind of did.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience podcast, where we delve into mental wellness, mindfulness, and personal growth. I'm your host, Keith Fiveson, and we're an official partner for the Wonderland Miami 2023 conference, which will be held from November the 9th through the 11th. And when you register, we're excited to offer you a 20% discount code, Mindfulness20. It's an opportunity for you to take advantage of the event. Today, we have a special guest who will share her journey to mental wellness and provide valuable resources for those on the path to healing. Our guest, Lorilee Binstock, a trauma survivor who has overcome childhood sexual abuse, anxiety, depression, and several suicide attempts. Lorilee's story inspires many, and we're honored to have her on the show. All right. Lorilee, oh my goodness, how are you? It's so good to see you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I am so honored to be on your program, and thank you for supporting Wonderland.
Oh yes, absolutely. And you're going to be there. You're going to moderate a panel. You're going to talk about various areas of your life. And I'm wondering about your personal journey, because this has really led you to Wonderland, and you're going to have an opportunity to uplift and inspire other people to go out on their own journey of discovery. Can you share with us a little bit about what your journey is about, and really what brought you to Wonderland? And let's hear it. Let's get into it.
Well, like you said, I am a childhood sexual abuse survivor. I was abused by my biological father, so that was a lot of trauma. I was around 8, 9 years old, and I didn't tell a soul. I didn't tell a soul till well into my 30s. And I actually, my mother would always say, if things get uncomfortable, just don't think about it and it'll go away. That was literally her mantra. Like, just don't think about it and it'll go away. So I tried to not think about it, and I was hoping it would go away. And for a little bit, it kind of did. But I was dealing with, by the time I was 12, I was abusing alcohol and smoking pot and taking pills, and it was really PTSD. What my parents would chalk it up to was, oh, she's just a bad kid. And I want people to know that PTSD symptoms, alcoholism, addiction, all of those things, they're symptoms of some sort of trauma. I believe that's true. I didn't know it at that point. So obviously I dealt with a lot of self-esteem issues, and this carried on until I was in my 20s. I was working as a morning show producer, and I had, I didn't mention, as you mentioned before, I also dealt with a lot of suicide attempts. There were a couple of suicide attempts around my teens, 13, 16, and many more. And to be honest, my parents didn't do anything about it because, I'm also Filipino. And in that culture, we don't talk about mental health. And, it was also the 90s. So we really didn't talk about mental health at that time. And it was really frowned upon. And so I think those suicide attempts were me just kind of reaching out and trying to seek help. And, by like the time I was working in news and I was doing the overnight shift, it all kind of came to a head again. And I was on, because I was doing the overnight shift, I was on Ambien and other sleeping medications, and I had overdosed, and I woke up in a psych ward of a hospital. And that's where they diagnosed me bipolar. At that time, they didn't know much about PTSD and just civilians. It was mostly, we talked about PTSD and veterans and soldiers. And so that wasn't even on their radar. So they just slapped bipolar disorder as my diagnosis. I was put on lithium and antipsychotics, and they weren't working.
A whole cocktail, right?
A whole cocktail. Yes, it was, and Adderall, actually, because I was also having a hard time focusing. So I was on plenty of medication, and like I said, I was on sleeping pills because I couldn't sleep. And so 10 years later, I eventually got out of the business. I just was like, oh, this is just not for me. I went to PR. I actually, at that point, I had a family. And I had a client who talked about being sexually abused by a family member. And he talked about PTSD. And I was like, oh my goodness, is this what I have? PTSD. He described every symptom that I was struggling with. And I kept it in for a very long time. And I'm not saying like, I was seeing a therapist. We never got into the abuse. I didn't until finally I had another suicide attempt. This one I was determined, like, I can't live like this. My kids can't live like this. My husband can't live like this. And call it divine intervention. But eventually I was able to, in my suicide attempt, it didn't work out. And I eventually broke down. I told my husband, and he said, we're going to get help. And I went into a residential treatment center for 31 days during the pandemic. It was actually right before the pandemic. I went in mid-February and came out in April, and the world had shut down. And obviously, they take your phone in residential treatment. My husband didn't want to tell me that the world had shut down at that point. So I came out, and it was a completely different world.
So this would have been like 2020, right?
This was 2020 when this had happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's truly remarkable in terms of your ability to go ahead and kind of plunge down and start to pick up those pieces and start to look at putting them back together again. And here you are, you're telling the story. And, I want to get into, obviously your talk at Wonderland, or the things that you might talk about, whether or not it's moderating a panel or entheogens, or talking about IFS, one of my favorite areas in terms of family systems, Dick Schwartz, the idea of parts, the idea of especially the exiled parts of ourselves, and how we can bring all of those things together. And I am myself, I'm a survivor of childhood trauma, childhood sexual abuse. And I haven't talked about that much, but it's work that I've done personally. And, I really want to applaud you for like coming out and giving a voice to all of this. Can you speak more to the like the parts, or the reunion, or the integrity of bringing all of these parts back together in yourself, and maybe perhaps what helped you on that journey to do that? It wasn't just talk therapy, I assume, right? No. It was a lot more. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Oh, I have a lot to unpack. I was fortunate enough, after residential treatment, I was told to, find a therapist. Even though I had a therapist who was also my psychiatrist, I went and sought out a more holistic approach. And someone, I had started my podcast at that point because I learned so much in residential treatment. And one of my guests told me about her experience with MDMA assisted therapy, and her therapist, who is an IFS therapist, who is also a psychedelic integrative therapist. Right. She introduced me to this person, and this person changed my life. And I told her, I was like, I am interested in psychedelic integrative therapy, and she said, well, let's work on internal family systems therapy first. Let's get to know all of your parts, so when you do decide to go that route of psychedelic integrative therapy, all the parts, the exiled parts, they're not going to be so scary.
So let's talk about the exiled parts for a moment, because I think that's so important, because those are kind of the pieces that disrupt the house, right? I mean, they it's not like they're exiled, but they're exiled and they still have energy.
Yeah, those are you know, for me, those exiled parts were the shame, all of the shame and all of the anger. Well, they could be also the firefighters, right? The ones that always try to put out the fire, but I would put them out with anger. And it's interesting because my first session sent me back to myself as an infant. So I was what you would call an accident. I came 9 years after my brother, and I didn't realize this. I mean, I did, but it wasn't in my consciousness. My parents would always tell me, like, oh, you were an accident. Oh, you know, and they kind of treated me like the accident. And, you know, they would make fun of me as a baby. They would, you know, I was not a very attractive baby, and they would always talk about how ugly I was as a child. And so I it was that energy that I was always feeling, that feeling of like abandonment, this feeling of...
Now wait a second. I know people can't see you. I just want to stop for a moment. So like, that is such a projection, because I'm looking at you, and certainly you're nowhere near, you know, quote unquote ugly. You know, you're beautiful spirit, and certainly present there. But that really is a terrible projection, right? That people put on you. It's their issue that they're throwing on you. So I just want to stop and acknowledge your presence and your beauty, if you will, okay?
Thank you.
Because I don't want that to sit. I don't want that to sit with our listeners, you know, and really in real life, maybe you totally transform over the last 4 or 5 years, but from the inside out, from the outside in, you seem to be a very beautiful person. Yeah.
Thank you. That's so sweet of you. You know, I never felt that way. And it's because, you know, you're told that you're ugly from an infant, and you're not good enough, and you weren't supposed to be here for a very long time. It really, you that attaches to you. And so, you know, that was something I had to really live with and deal with. And I didn't deal with that until 20 something years later. So it's very, or 30 years at this point, because when I was an infant, when my parents started, you know, talking to me like that, they would say it jokingly, as if that made it all okay. But I embodied that that self-hatred, that shame, that feeling of ugliness. Like I just, that was me. And you know, it was really difficult to manage, and those were my exiled parts, those parts that I was really ashamed of, that I didn't, you know, and you try to put them away, but they come out because you're not giving them the space, you're not holding that space for them.
Right. And then there's that protector that's judging and putting things back into the corner, like, you know, you shut up, I don't want to hear from you right now. No, that's not right. You know, you want to do this, you want to do that, whatever. And then of course you can move into high judgment mode and not really into integration mode or high achiever mode. It sounds like you went that path certainly as well, right?
I feel like I've embodied all of the paths. I was the high achiever, and I was the, you know, I feel like it was my protector that actually kind of said, you know, you aren't good enough. We're gonna hold you back because we don't want to put you out there, because if we put you out there, then everyone's gonna tell you you're ugly. So, you know, it was really, I had to struggle with all of my parts. And I think that's what also took a while before I even started the integrative therapy or the psychedelic integrative therapy, or psychedelic therapy itself, was because I really didn't know who my parts were. Wow. It was all blended.
And what happened with that? I mean, that must have opened up some real big doors for you. What was that? It really did. Like?
Well, one of my exiled parts was anger. or firefighter. I get really very confused with it because I feel like my anger does try to protect me, but it's also what also causes me shame. It's but I had
that reaction formation, that kind of, that trigger, right?
Exactly.
Someone says something to you, and then all of a sudden the firefighter moves in to protect you, right?
And that was that. And that came out a lot. And what I realized, and it was an MDMA session where I actually experienced my father's childhood where he was being abused as well. And because it was MDMA, I was able to have a lot of compassion for that part. But what I had realized is the anger that had come out was because that was what actually stopped the abuse. When I would be explosive, it would scare my father. And actually scared him to the point where he like moved out of the house and left the country for a little bit. Because I think I was so volatile. He didn't know what was going to happen if I was going to say anything. Right. And so in a way that anger was protecting me when I knew when that anger would come out and it pushed him away and it stopped the abuse. That anger was like, oh, here I am. This is what I was supposed to do. This is my job. So anytime you feel uncomfortable, I'm going to come out and I'm going to scare the shit out of everybody. And so that was understanding that anger was there to protect me. And then, eventually it would cause me some shame because it was like when I would be explosive, I'd lose a little bit of my own dignity because I felt like I would lose control at that point.
So like for you, as your dad, and for me, it was a family member's friend. And, when we start taking a look at the dynamics, obviously, you had to live within the family. And I'm just wondering the dynamics of that relationship and how it's evolved since you've done the work. If your father's still in your life, if you've got, if you were able to move and articulate, have emotional literacy around the anger and be able to right size that relationship in a way that allowed you to bring him into the picture and have a relationship in some way. I always say, as far as trauma is concerned, the people who hurt you, you don't have to hate them. You can love them from far away. They don't have to be in your life every single day, but you can love them from a distance, and you can wish them well. So I'm wondering what your story is around that, and how does that work today?
I mean, that's really interesting. I feel like a lot of people have a lot of questions around that because there was a point where I had to pretend everything was okay before I got the help. My dad was in my, walked me down the aisle at my wedding, So when all of this came out, I think it was very shocking to a lot of people. A lot of people liked my dad. And that was really difficult for me. But then once it came out, I did have a lot of anger. But after that MDMA session, I was able to, I don't want to say forgive, but understand what had happened. That because for the longest time, so much of my life, I was like, he knew what he was doing. This, screw he didn't know any better. But the truth is he really didn't know any better. He had experienced abuse himself.
And abusers abuse. I mean, exactly. In a lot of cases, unless they work through their own exiled parts,
right?
Their own trauma, right?
Exactly.
So you found compassion, and within that, I'm sorry I interrupted you. So
no. Well, within that, I was able to just let go of the anger. It was for myself. But I don't have a relationship with him actually. After I talked to my mom about it, he developed dementia and just went downhill very quickly.
Can I ask you how old he is today? If he had developed dementia, is he a really senior guy or?
He's in his 70s. late 70s. I think, I feel like that had all deteriorated him because he wasn't getting help. I knew something was always off with him, and I always thought, oh, you should get help. And he was just like, there's nothing wrong with me. That was kind of his thing, something's wrong with you. And so I don't have a relationship with him. And a lot of it has to do with, I want to protect my children. And I don't feel comfortable with, and before I did get help, when my children were around my father, I always had all of this anxiety. And I didn't realize what it was. And I guess looking back, it was because I didn't want him to be around my children. I didn't, I don't know what would happen.
Well, it's so interesting. I always think about, you can't pick your family, but you can pick your friends, and your family aren't really the people that necessarily you were born with. They're people that see you, lift you up, support you when you're down, go ahead and, they gather around you when you need people to gather around you and support you. So it's wonderful that you've been able to, really discern in your life at the age that you're at, this young age, in your family, and being able to go ahead and have that retrospect, that introspect that allows you to, present yourself now as somebody who is in the world, who's done a lot of work and continues to do the work and continues to try to help other people. So the resources that you drew on, we're talking about IFS, we talk about psychedelics and entheogens. So within the psychedelic realm, the MDMA specifically, which is a heart opener that allows you then to step away from your own vehicle and take a look at how it's made, if you will, and all the components of it. You were able to do that. And then you were able to have some compassion about your own experience and look at it through the lens of, sort of the epigenetic lens of intergenerational trauma and understanding your dad and having more compassion for him. But then also in that framework, understanding that you yourself needed to guard yourself against more trauma, against triggering more trauma through that relationship. So again, that's sort of compassion, loving someone at a distance, but not necessarily letting them reignite, the trauma inside of you. Is that a fair sort of a synopsis of that?
I would say that was fair. Yeah, okay. That is fair.
Good. So from a resource viewpoint, in terms of, your healing journey, are there other things that you're recommending to folks now as you start to take a look at this, this new spot that you're in terms of being a voice for not only, women, but also men and people who are and have, gone through their own traumas? I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of what you would recommend in terms of the healing journey. Is it just psychedelics and MDMA?
That's really interesting, because I feel like I have in last few months especially, but in the last couple of years since I started my podcast, people have asked me what it is that they think has helped me. And I think it's been a lot of things. I think it has been, I think the psychedelic therapy, because once I started with MDMA, I needed to start a little slower. Then I moved to psilocybin, then I eventually moved to LSD. I absolutely 100% recommend psychedelics. I think psychedelics creates, there was this article that came out about how, you can teach an old dog new tricks, especially with psychedelics, because you're able to create these new neural pathways instead of sticking to these same behaviors that may not have been serving you, and actually finding new pathways to new behaviors that, will help you evolve and grow. And I believe post-traumatic growth is real, and it's possible. And so I think, I always say, internal family systems therapy. I feel that if you start with internal family systems therapy, you can go the route of psychedelics if you choose, or you can go, I think it's similar to hypnotherapy. You're able to drop into your subconscious more easily if you've done a lot of work with internal family systems. But like I said, when I was in residential treatment, I did a lot of work with somatic experiencing, a lot of work with EMDR. So I think I think there's a lot of stuff out there, and I don't think it necessarily needs to be one or the other. It could be all of it. I mean, that's what I did.
And from I totally get it. And from a seeker viewpoint, it's like, not everything there's a big buffet up there. You don't have to take everything on the buffet, but you can take the things that really resonate with you and the things that really sort of draw you to them. And I'm wondering, you found a therapist, and certainly they helped you provide some new perspectives. Do you think the therapeutic, where do you think the therapeutic community is at right now? And because, from a trauma viewpoint, trauma is pretty, it's the catchphrase. Everyone talks about trauma nowadays. There's systemic trauma in our society. We're sort of born into a pit of trauma, and then we're, if we say no, this isn't right, then something's wrong with us somehow, that we're not normalized within the cesspool of trauma. We've got to either pick ourselves up and kind of look at it, or talk about it, or work through it. So do you think that there's a specific path of therapy? Perhaps, I'm not a big fan of Freudian therapy or cognitive therapy or Jungian therapy. I like Jungian therapy, and I think some cognitive therapy is good. But do you have any thoughts about that at all?
I hate to knock just traditional talk therapy.
Yeah.
But I was in talk therapy for 20 years before I found internal family systems therapy. And it was just 20 years of the same thing, and still I was suicidal. I think it was once I got into internal family systems therapy and eventually, psychedelic integrative therapy, where I don't feel suicidal. Like, I would walk around, I would do weekly therapy, and I'd still walk around and be like, if that bus hit me, it wouldn't be the end of the world, kind of thing. And that was not,
sort of stuck with your story, right?
Right. Exactly. And I hate just, I think if you need a therapy, and, if you need to talk to somebody, I think you should. But I do think if you have especially dealt with a lot of, severe trauma, if you are struggling with PTSD, I do think internal family systems therapy has been extremely helpful, and even more so psychedelic.
Yeah,
therapy.
Because it kind of breaks down, the parts, right? It looks at family systems, it looks at constellation work. You do some, epigenetic work, my ancestors, and then there is that narrative that's there becomes that understanding when you're able to step away from the vehicle, like through the use of psychedelics, or through, I would even, this is the mindfulness experience, and we talk about psychedelics as a way to really help people then to become more mindful. But at the end of the day, it's really about how are you sitting with yourself, and are you able to sit with yourself and breathe and really love yourself and be present not only to yourself, but to your body, your mind, your spirit, your food, your ability to sleep, as well as your relationships, your environment, and your aspirations, right? All of those things are incredibly important. But if you're dealing with trauma, if you're trauma, you're ridden, it's hard to sit. It's hard to be present.
It is. And I didn't want to be present. Nobody will, if you go into your head and you're experiencing that trauma and that stress, it's, why do you want to be present? Why do you want to see that? But the truth is, if you're healing it, if you're working through it, and you're exploring it, and exploring it with someone who understands it, you're getting to the root of it. I think it's getting to the root of it. I think talk therapy really masks what's happening then. You're talking about what happened the day before. But I think in IFS therapy, internal family systems, you go in deep and you get to the root, and then you negotiate what is it that I need? What is it that what's coming up now, because of that root cause? And then I think you can work from there. And I think that's healing the root. That's actually healing the actual wound versus putting a Band-Aid over it.
Right. I like my mother was 52 when she died. She had alcohol related poisoning, otherwise cirrhosis of the liver, and she had a family, came from a family of 5-6 kids. Dad died at 45. And so, like, from an upbringing viewpoint, I and this all relates back to the root. When you start taking a look at your family only does as well as their parenting only can be as good as they were parented. And when you look at that and you start doing that root cause work, that family systems work, then you start to go, my goodness, those poor babies, those sweet, I'm so sorry for them, and it doesn't take away the pain personally, but what it does is it allows you to move away from it a little bit and use compassion as a way to really understand that, the people, your perpetrators, weren't, they didn't know what they were doing, or they thought they did, but they were acting out of their own imprints.
Right. Yeah, it's absolutely correct.
Yeah, and the main thing is to rewrite the story, right? When you're able to change your story, you're able to change your life. So, being able to get a new narrative, and you being able to go ahead and go through that work and then be where you are. I mean, here you are, you'll be down in Wonderland, and you're spreading the word, and you're talking about a story of surviving but thriving, right? I love that. Yeah, yes. I think that's so wonderful. Let me ask you, you were on antidepressants for a while and antipsychotics. I don't think that they're the answer.
I don't either.
What what I was going to ask you what you thought about them, but I don't know whether or not we have to go into that much.
I mean, I think it helped put the fire out. I think it'll help. It can help put the fire out for a little bit. I don't think you should be depending on them, because it was. I mean, obviously, I had my hair fall out with SSRIs, and that completely gave me more issues. And it wasn't until I had to wean off of the medication to do psychedelics to actually realize, like, I didn't need it. I didn't need them, because I needed to heal the root. I didn't need the SSRIs. I believe is just the Band-Aid. It's there to fix the symptoms, but it's not healing. It's not healing anything, I think. And I am sure there are a lot of people who are like, that's not true. But that's just my personal opinion. I feel that when I was able to heal the wound, the actual wound, and not just put a Band-Aid over the symptoms, I was okay. I was so much better off.
So, as we start talking about that, the ability to wean yourself off of SSRIs, I mean, we're talking about so many people in society right now that are in pain, that are feeling lonely, that are feeling depressed, that are feeling suicidal, that have suicidal ideations, that are going through their own brand of hell, if you will. And I'm wondering, while we're into this, what would you say to those people in terms of, ways of, getting help? How do they normalize? How do they hold on to, rather than stuff, the pain and the trauma that they might have, given, your experience and your insights?
Well, I do feel like talking to somebody. I kept my story in for a very long time. I feel like talking to somebody is a start.
Group work, or just
group work. I thought I hated group work, but once I was forced into it, I was like, wow, this is really helpful, because it was in group work when I actually said out loud what had happened to me. And then other people are like, I never talked about this, but that happened to me too. There's a lot of people going through the same thing. And I think when you realize that you are not alone, that changes everything. Then you realize you can lean on people. You realize you can get help. And I think it's telling the story, you telling your story, me telling my story, and the more we are, and this is why we do what we do, right? We're storytellers, and we want to help amplify other people's voices. And when we're able to do that, the people who don't feel that they have a voice feel like they can. You're turning your mess into your message. And
you're turning your mess into your message. I love that. I'm gonna steal that. That's great.
Do it. It's good because it's what you. If you can do that, you're just helping another person.
Right. And we're only as sick as our secrets. So, and suddenly when you're vulnerable, there's a lot of strength in vulnerability. There's a lot of strength that comes out of like telling your story, and no longer a victim, you're the victor, right? You're no longer a sinner, you're a saint, in some way, because you've been able to own that part of yourself, and you've been able to go ahead and say, here I am. This is the thing that happened to me, and I'm still okay. I'm still so no matter how bad your pain, no matter how bad your sorrow, let's talk about it. Let's be real. There's not enough realness in the world. It's sort of like, you gotta be quiet.
No, let's be loud.
Let's be loud. I like that. Especially at my age, I'm like, hey, grow old, but not quiet, So.
Exactly. I feel like as I've gotten older, and maybe this is the healing, but I feel like I'm getting my voice, and I'm now I'm more comfortable talking about it, and spreading that message that, you can get help, and post-traumatic growth is real. And it doesn't, I saw this quote the other day that said, you heal, you don't heal so to get over the trauma. You've lived with the trauma, you're used to the trauma. You heal to find joy. And that, I feel like that's true, because like I said, I lived with the trauma, and I was just like, this is just my life. And that doesn't have to be.
So let me ask you, you talked about being a parent. Can you talk about some of the things that you kind of share with your children, and maybe some insights that you kind of give them, as a parent, to go ahead and kind of deal with, because bullying is a big thing, and for kids. And I'm just wondering, how do you then kind of change the story from an intergenerational viewpoint, now that you've looked at the story, and you've looked at that, and holding that story with care and love and concern, and now this is your little child that you've brought back into your experience, and now you have children. I'm wondering, does that impact your parenting in some way? And if so, how?
Yes, it does. I mean, and to be honest, like, there are times I look at my daughter, and we butt heads, because sometimes I see her. She's also sometimes I see that exiled part in her, and I'm like, oh, I need to really hold back. But I feel like mindfulness has been the most important part for me in parenting my children, because I'm more mindful about what I've learned, and I try to pass that down. And like you said, with the bullying, I talk about, hurt people, what's happening in this other person's life that they feel that they have to say these mean things to you, or do these mean things to you. And maybe ask them, is there something going on that you can talk to me about? And I feel like that has served my daughter very well, in that she is very compassionate, and she always, even though she gets really worked up, she also is able to be caring and compassionate, and talk to them about, is there anything going on? You can always talk to me. That was really hurtful what you said. and that has been mind-blowing to me. A couple of years ago, I put a glass of water, and I know this is so cliche, but I put a glass of water in front of them, and it's like, is it half full or is it half empty? The thing is, the glass is going to be the same no matter what, but it's how you look at it. Is it if you fill your life with abundance, like it's half full, and it's when there are bad things that are happening, because bad things are going to happen. It's finding that opportunity in all the bad stuff. Like, how can I grow? Where am I going to be able to grow in the bad things that happen? And I wish somebody told me this stuff. And so that is kind of what I've passed down to my kids, and that, be mindful. Like, you don't have to, shrink yourself to make other people bigger, but, just understand that they might be going through something just as well, and not to take it personally, not to make it about you. And compassion.
That's beautiful, and I love the phrase mindful, and mindfulness, because we're the mindfulness experience. But I think most people don't really understand that, really from an ancient Buddhist viewpoint, mindfulness is that space between recognition and choice. So,
yes.
And it's the space that gives you the opportunity to change your karma, right? Karma is, not only with what you're born with, but it's the pre-existing conditions and the framework, the memories, and the how they cast the clay, if you will, how the clay is formed, right? That is sort of what you're born with, and then you get to use that, and how you are mindful is that space, that opportunity between stimulus and response, right? That stimulus and response. So what you're doing with your daughter is so wonderful, because what you're doing is you're providing her the framework to say, well, wait a second, what's going on for them, and why are they attacking me, and what's that, and really being able to step away from the vehicle and really, look at it in a different way. And I just applaud you for doing that. I mean, that's great. Isn't that a wonderful outcome of you having that space between your experience as a child and the opportunity to step away and look at that experience, and then have different outcomes as you go forward? Isn't that wonderful?
That's the goal.
Yeah. So I know that you're going to be at the conference, and I'm wondering, as we start to wind down here, what kind of messages would you like to share maybe with our listeners about the importance of mental wellness, seeking help when you need it, maybe helping to help them in some way, maybe even directly, with information about your website or information about some things that you're up to?
Yes, well, I do think that when, like you said, there's that the whole, I think choice, I think healing is the freedom to have your own choices. And I feel like if you're struggling, I think, this is one thing that I dealt with, is what was an issue, was having to ask for help. You asking for help has changed a lot in my own life. And so if you're struggling, I feel, go to the person you trust the most, or go to a stranger. You can shoot me an email. You can find me at traumasurvivorthriver.com and contact me there. There are a lot of resources out there. We just need to talk about what resources are there. And I'm happy to provide that. There's some resources on my website. And I mean, this podcast itself is a wonderful resource in mindfulness, because I think mindfulness is key in getting to that point, is really what's going to, drive your growth and healing. And so, yes. And if you can make it to Wonderland, I'd love to see you there. Please come up and talk to me. I would be most grateful for that.
Great. Well, it's going to be wonderful. And I really appreciate you saying, ask for help, because someone told me a long time ago, the three biggest words you can use in life is, I need help.
Yeah.
I need help, and it really does take a lot. And obviously, you're someone who has not only followed that path, but gotten the help, and now you're providing it. So thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for being here and for doing what you do, Lorilee, and for being a guest on the Mindfulness Experience.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your help and having me on and sharing my story.
We look forward to seeing you at Wonderland.
All right, hope to see you there.
Thank you, Lorilee, for sharing your story with us and providing valuable insights into mental wellness. To our listeners, this interview has provided, I hope it's provided you with helpful resources and the motivation to seek help when you need it. Remember, healing is a journey, and there is always a time to start. Also, remember Mindfulness 20, the code to use when you register for the Wonderland Miami 2023 conference from November the 9th through the 11th. It's an incredible opportunity to learn more about mental wellness and mindfulness, as well as the area of psychedelics, entheogens, and investments. Until the next time, stay mindful and stay well.